think we can go ahead and get started here. Bartles has a couple of labs lined up for you that you should really enjoy from this course. So get us going. We'll still go through the intro since it's just a couple of you, but you'll have fun, and now you've got two of us. So if you have any questions, we can assist you with anything. But my name is Brandon Sally. I think I've met both of you, seen you this week. One of the curriculum developers here at cyber.org. And we're going to be talking about our Intro to Linux course. And then with me and going through the labs is Jonathan Bartles. He's based out of Texas. Just a little bit of background information about myself, and then I'll pass it on to him so he can give his little intro spiel. Started traditional science, biology, chemistry, STEM courses. Went from that and got into robotics, actually working with cyber.org in robotics competitions, setting up the challenges, the logistics, all of that, going through those competitions. It was kind of a entry for several students to get interested into some of the topics that are covered by the cyber.org courses. So it got them into it, and then I started teaching those courses, teaching cyber literacy, then getting into some of the courses that are aligned to CompTIA certification and prepping the students for that. Went from that to being over science and the cyber courses as far as curriculum, kind of more on the admin side, and then eventually was supervising all of the curriculum for the entire school. Realized administration is not the best thing to be in, not quite as fun as being in the classroom. But then I hopped over to cyber.org and actually started writing the curriculum. So I've been here for a little bit over a year and a half, had a blast, especially since I've been using these courses. As Christy, you were saying, you've used it and enjoyed them. You're excited to see the new stuff. Now to be a part of that process and creating new lessons and things, it's a lot of fun, and getting to meet teachers and share the materials and see how they use it in their classroom and see how they adapt it and pull and put all things together is really cool. So that was my intro, and I'll pass it on to Bartles to talk about himself.
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, my start into adulthood was actually in the math and science fields, so similar to cybersecurity, but not exactly the same. I was a little teaching, a little tutoring, a little bit of curriculum development. I'd done that for a few years before joining cyber.org, which at the time was NYSERC. There was about a 2-week overlap by the time it had switched from NYSERC to cyber.org when I started. I've pretty much had my hands involved with any of the courses that we have written towards CompTIA certification. So IT fundamentals, Network Plus, the cybersecurity course, which is aligned to Security Plus, and then this Linux course, which is aligned to Linux Plus that Brandon will go into a little more detail. I'm trying to make a push to get towards A+ as well. I don't want to make any promises, but I'd like to see that so we could have that whole core pathway from CompTIA. And then I was also one of the co-architects of the cyber.org range, so was able to help build that from scratch. I can't take any credit for what you see from the forward-facing view with the web page and whatnot, but all of the back-end stuff on AWS, where the resources come from, I was one of the 3 main ones there.
All right, so get us started, just kind of a quick intro or an agenda, really objectives, what we want to do for the day. First off, we'll cover who we are, who is cyber.org. If you're familiar with our resources, then you know who we are, but I'll still do the little intro. We'll look at the material, so I'll actually show you the course in Canvas so you can see what it looks like, and then just see what's offered with the course as far as the actual teacher resources, how the lesson notes are arranged, lessons look, and then the students actually have that you can put in front of them to help them prepare for the Linux Plus. Then we'll look at some of the labs on the range. So we'll discuss the range and how we use it. The Intro to Linux course spotlights, or we like to say it spotlights our Ubuntu machine. It does use the Kali Linux also, because that's always our go-to for cybersecurity concepts and things like that. And then with talking about some of these concepts in Linux, in some cases you'll be using both machines at the same time. So working, having two Linux machines open, seeing how they can connect, how you can perform certain tasks using those machines. So it's really cool. It's different than the other courses because it uses the Ubuntu primarily over the others. So you'll get to see the inside of that, and people are usually interested to see how we utilize that machine. Bartles has dropped the link in the chat that has a login. So if you click on that, you'll be able to get your login. And then all you have to do is go over to apps.cyber.org and log in using that. Other little intro. So who are we? Cyber.org is primarily sponsored on the resources. Majority of the things that you see and use in the classroom come from funding from the Department of Homeland Security, specifically the cybersecurity and getting caught up in my words today. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Government loves those acronyms, so spelling them all out and saying them all out is a bit of a twister. But they provide us with grant funding through the CTAP grant that allows us to provide everything needed for the teacher to prepare students to be ready to take a career in the cybersecurity workforce, which is important. The reason for that being as we move towards a more technology and cyber-based society, we have technology ingrained in just about everything we do. You think about your daily lives from the moment you wake up, if you're getting gas from your car, picking up groceries, like even grabbing something to eat, it may all go through an app or some kind of device. There's technology involved with those companies and how they function. And because of that, as more things move towards being on more of the virtual side, there's going to be a higher risk for there being some kind of flaw or some kind of area where a malicious user could exploit that vulnerability. That's where we come in. We give you all these things so that hopefully you get the students engaged. They want to pursue an area in this career field, and they can be the future cybersecurity workers of tomorrow to help remedy some of those issues that pop up. As far as other things that we do PD like you're doing now, and so now you're a part of the numbers where we have people enrolled in curriculum and professional development. As far as the range, so the range also receives grant funding. It's primarily actually funded by the state of Louisiana. So I like to tell people there's a couple good things about Louisiana. One, we have good food, and then two, we offer a free range, which people enjoy. So having a range is important when talking about these concepts because you, in some cases, are going to deal with some tools or do some things that you may not want to expose your actual machine to. Even in Linux, even though it doesn't have a primary focus on cybersecurity, it's one of the subdomains. There's still some things in there because you want to cover being able to move files between machines and things like that. And you may not have that capability in your classroom. There's not too many schools out there that can use Linux machines or have Linux machines established and set up on their network. And so the range allows you to do that. It's a safe browser-based environment, so there's no downloads, no software to install, none of that jazz. You just go to apps.cyber.org. You can access those 4 machines. And as I said earlier, the primary focus will be in the Ubuntu machine and then the Kali Linux, since this is the Linux Intro to Linux course. Then the curriculum sign up. And I feel like the people we have here today have probably seen this, probably have access or have at least applied and will have access shortly. But do not forget to make sure you have access to the curriculum because everything's going to tie in to the range. And you'll see I go into the course here in a second, what it actually looks like and what resources you can get for the Intro to Linux course. As far as accessing the curriculum from our homepage, you can click sign up or log in. And what I'm going to do is actually just jump over to the course. I had the range open. I go to our main page. So you can see at the top, sign up or log in, but also it's right here also. So multiple places, sign up, log in. I'm going to log in and give you an idea of the course. So when you first log into Canvas, it's probably going to look a little bit different. There was actually an update that was just pushed out the other day that actually reset some of my favorites. So what you're going to actually probably see is the elementary, middle school, and high school tabs. You can click on those and get to the course. The Intro to Linux course is at 9 through 12 students, so it's going to be part of the high school course. Just for the quick info, in case you do want to favorite your courses and have them pop up like this, if you click Courses on the left side and then click All Courses at the top, you can add a star next to any of the courses, and that will allow them to pop up on your dashboard just to make it a little bit more accessible for you to click on, and you don't have to have that extra click. But just to show you, I'll click on high school, and it has Intro to Cybersecurity, and Intro to Linux. And so this is the one we're focused on today. So I'll click on that course. It will load the course up, give you an idea of how it's set up. The landing page that you land on is the home page. It is our for the most part, suggested order. It's more of a teacher-friendly look where it's broken down into units. Has a little bit easier way to take the students through the course. So when you look at it, you see Unit 1, it does start with lessons in 1, but then notice it jumps to 3. So what you're seeing here is the actual objective from the CompTIA objective for the Linux Plus exam. And so, but we do have Unit 1 here, things you can expect from the course. From the home page, there's a syllabus example, policy, things like that, but there's also a lab description. You can download this and it'll give a quick description, kind of a rundown of every lab that's associated in the Intro to Linux course. And of course it opened on a different window, but if I bring it up, so to give you the lab name, what lesson it actually ties to. Of course, there's some other things when it was added and stuff like that. Any recommended prereq labs before you get to it, and then it gives you a description and some notes also. So if you kind of wanted just more of a whole view, kind of look over the labs, maybe help plan out the semester or the year, if you're pulling this into different things, then you could do that. There's also a commands cheat sheet over here. And so with this, of course, if you're looking to get the student certified, they would need to know the commands offhand. But as they're learning that, it would help to have that cheat sheet with you. And I always like to tell people, you need to know the material to pass the test. But honestly, once you get out in the real world, if you forget a command or exactly how a command works, you can always look at the manual inside the Linux machine, have your own sheets like that. Especially in the IT field, we like to joke around and say if there's ever a problem, step 1 is you Google the problem and see if it's already been done. So any resources that we have available to help the students out, I highly recommend letting them have that. If you want to look at these, they're here. I won't go open it up and show you, but those are just the CompTIA objectives. And then there's a Fun with Linux lab up here. It's up here because it's not necessarily tied to any objective, but it goes through several activities that are actually quite fun to do on the machine, and you can do these with the Kali Linux. The Ubuntu actually works with either one, but it gets the students used to using the command line, going through installing, removing applications and things like that. It can be chunked and kind of broken down to be done over a course of a few days, or wherever you see fit. As far as the actual unit breakdown, there's a unit lesson plan that you can click on. And if we open up one, it's going to give you an overview, student objectives, guiding question, pretty much everything you're looking for when you're going to put together a lesson plan. So if you have administrators that are going to come around, check, see what you're doing and things like that, this would assist you with that. Of course, this can easily be copied and put into any template if you have a specific template that your school or district uses. It'll give you a rough estimate of how long it would take to get through that unit. It's going to have some connections, and then it'll give you the actual lessons, labs, and resources that are used in that particular unit. As far as the other things in it, it'll give you some things to launch that unit as far as prerequisite questions. You may find yourself in a case where if you're teaching them material, the students already know quite a bit about Linux, or they may not know anything about Linux. And so it's nice to have those pre-lesson questions just to kind of judge the atmosphere of the classroom and see where they're at. And then there's some notes and things that we keep along the side, just offering different support recommendations for various things. It's changes based on what's going on as far as if we're talking about a lesson or a lab. And then we'll spotlight some careers in there, and then you'll get some objectives for each lesson, lab, as you go through it. Other things in the course, we have lesson notes. If you're familiar with our courses, we use all these teacher notes. And they still kind of have a teacher look to them. So you look, one of the very first things the students will do. But this is essentially our way of writing a book to go along with this particular test or course. So it's going to have quite a bit of background information, go into a little bit more in-depth info on the topics that are covered in the lesson. As you can see, it's pretty dense with information. So we changed this for just about every course, instead of having that teacher notes to lesson notes, is because we didn't want it to be held away from students. So with this, you could give this to the students as well as a resource, but I do recommend going through the actual PowerPoint, teaching the lesson and things like that, and then perhaps providing this kind of at the end. You wouldn't want to give them all the information up front, because then they'll kind of look at you and say, why do we have to take notes? You just gave me all the notes, and you don't want that. As far as teaching lesson, PowerPoint, and so I know when I open this, it's going to jump over to the other screen. But you can just see, here's what the PowerPoints look like, and they hit those key points from those lesson notes. And so you can see how those are laid out. And so it provides everything needed to hit that objective in an easy, nicely formatted fashion. There's going to be some guided notes. Actually, I should have opened the answer key one so you can see both. So if we look at the guided notes, so they of course wouldn't have the key, but as the teacher, you can see the key. So these are just some questions to have as you go through the lesson over the PowerPoint that the students can answer to ensure that, one, they're actually paying attention, they're on task, going along the lesson, but also just checking for understanding, making sure they understand the concepts you're covering, as well as preparing for the test. And of course, it's open quite a bit. There's quite a bit of space here, so they could take additional notes on it. So it's a couple of things you could provide with them. And then lastly, there's going to be a quiz and a key. As far as the quiz, we leave them in an easy to change Word format. That way, if you wanted to add questions, tweak questions, you could do that. But there's simply multiple choice based off of example CompTIA questions. If you've ever taken one of the CompTIA tests, you know that they are, for the most part, they're all going to be multiple choice, but their testing style is unique because in some cases there will be questions that it's necessarily what is the exact correct answer. It's going to be what is the best answer. So it's good to have that there to assess the students, get them used to the testing format. And I always recommend having the students also take several practice tests if you're going to push for a CompTIA certification, because sometimes you can get caught up on just the way the questions are formatted. And I think Bartles and I both say their questions are sometimes a struggle simply because we know that 3 out of the 4 answers could be correct, but it's trying to figure out which one is actually the best answer. So they like to trick you up on things like that. Overall, we have 8 units in the course, and it's meant to be about 90 hours, so about 1 semester. So this could actually be paired up with a different course, or you could pull lessons from this and use it in cybersecurity, networking. It's based on what you're teaching. Or you could pair it up with something like the ITF exam, which is going to be changed shortly by CompTIA to the Tech Plus. So it'll pair nicely with that. If you look at CompTIA's actual order, the way they have it laid out is they actually have the Linux Plus as an upper level course. According to their pathway, it would be if you were going cybersecurity, you would take the foundational test, you would take the Security Plus, and then you would go into the upper level security exams. The Linux Plus, they put more as if a student was going, student or adult really, was going into more the server side or more the networking system administrator side, things like that. But again, some of these topics are nice. You get into cybersecurity and you start talking about some of the tools used, and they want to know a little bit more about the Linux machine or a little bit more about how they function. Some of these labs are great at getting into that. One of the ones I know we're doing today is the sudo lab. So sudo is used a ton in cybersecurity because you need those administrative rights to perform certain actions, run certain commands. And so this one covers actually how a user would be set up to be given those rights and things like that. So it's kind of a little bit more in-depth background information for your students. Any questions about the course? I see Bartles just dropped the link to the CompTIA certification, which certification. So they have some great resources on kind of directing you where to go, what test to take, what in what order, and things like that.
Yeah, and that shows those different pathways as well. So like the core pathway, which said with the ITF A
Go
plus,
ahead
Net
and
plus, Security
open it
plus.
up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so you can see the core pathway, that one that you're probably familiar with us doing, and then you look more at infrastructure and that back end with working with servers and things like that. So you still have that core, and then it would branch off into these. But of course, don't limit it to just that. That's their suggested order. Like I said, you could easily fit Linux in with some other courses or pull some topics in. Is Tech Plus going to be radically different? So, great question, and I really wish we had a solid answer. We've talked to a couple of representatives. We see them all the time at conferences and things like that. From what the last person I spoke with, and I think they've actually changed the dates on a little bit just to make sure it's finalized, is it at its core, it's still going to be the ITF topics. That's going to be probably like 98% of it. They're just going to expand on some new ideas and new technology that's come out. The two things they wanted to expand on, one was adding just a really quick kind of overview of artificial intelligence and how it's being implemented in technology and everything, and then expand a little bit in cloud services, because nowadays cloud is such a heavy topic. Nobody really is saving to their local machines and using physical devices to necessarily save and transfer. Everything is pushing towards that cloud, and so they want to add a little bit of meat to that section just to expand on it a little bit. And from what I understand, that's how it's going to be different. As far as structure and things like that, not really sure if that's necessarily going to change and how they're going to do it. Hopefully they release more information about that though. Let's see what you guys. But yes, that's actually something we were just discussing prior to starting up this meeting. So yes, we're waiting just like you are. And I know as a teacher that's a little bit stressful on your side, because it's like I've got to teach this test and you need some material for it. So yes, as soon as we know, we'll make sure things get put out and updated properly and stuff like that. Glad to help out. Any other questions about the actual course or anything like that? If not, then let's see. Stop sharing so I can pass the torch. I have to make at least one Olympics reference. I mean, it is going on. So I'm gonna pass it on to Bartles, and hopefully everybody got logged in and was able to get to the range.
As Brandon has mentioned, a lot of the Intro to Linux labs are utilizing that Ubuntu Linux course. He had mentioned the to sudo or not to sudo lab, and that's what we're going to start off with. This is one of those things where we don't have as much experience presenting this material as we do with the cybersecurity course. So there's a possibility we get short on time with the second lab. So bear with me here. We'll see how quickly we move along with this material. For this to sudo or not to sudo lab, we'll only be using the Ubuntu Linux machine. You may notice I have both the Ubuntu and the Kali Linux launched. I am going to duplicate my tabs. So that's a right-click duplicate tab. So I can open up the Kali Linux in one of them because the second lab utilizes both Linux machines. But then in that first tab, I'm going to open up the Ubuntu Linux. If you'd used one of those logins that were on the bit.ly link, that would get you a student access to my classroom, and that interface is just a little bit different. You don't see all of the users in that classroom. You just see the individual machines for your student login. You would see the Kali Linux and the Ubuntu are already launched, so you could connect to those. The other two machines, the Windows Server and Windows 7, were not launched yet. So depending on when students run through this course, if they're using this as an introduction to Linux before looking at the cybersecurity course, they may not be familiar with sudo, the superuser do command. They may not understand the differences between different permissions or whatnot, but in general, they should have some sort of idea, understanding like when they log into Facebook, they're logging in as a user. They don't have admin rights on Facebook to do different things. That's a similar analogy there for them, is understanding the differences between basic users and then having administrative privileges with that sudo command and being part of the sudoers group. So the few steps that we're going to work through here, we're going to execute some commands with and without sudo. We will add a new user to the system and try to execute those same commands as the new user. Once those sudo commands fail because that new user wasn't created as a user in the sudoer group, they'll be added to the sudoers list, and then we'll be able to see that once they're added, they can start running commands with sudo. So to get started, we need to open a terminal. So in our Ubuntu Linux machine, on the left-hand side, we see that bar there that's got the different icons for some applications. The black rectangle with a white border is our terminal, so we can left-click that. And I'll get zoomed in here a little, just so it's a little easier for everyone to see if you happen to be viewing this with a smaller screen. By default, we are logged in as Ubuntu, which is the base user for this system. The prompt here, what this tells me is the user I'm logged in as and the IP address of this machine. So I know the IP address of the Ubuntu Linux machine is 10.15.113.5, and then I know I'm logged in as Ubuntu. There's a file on the system in the root etc directory called the shadow file. And again, depending on when you're running through this course in comparison to the cybersecurity course, you may already know of the shadow file. You may not know of the shadow file. It's not necessarily important to know what that file is for this lab. It's just important to see how this behaves when we try to view the contents of the file with the cat command. So it's cat, it's a space. We read it as root because we're starting in the root directory. It's an absolute path. So it's that /etc/shadow. And I get this permission denied. In general, when I'm working through the terminal, I see permission denied. The next thing I try to do is just throw sudo in front of it. Sudo is this super user do command. So sudo, and then everything else will be the same. So sudo cat root etc shadow. I get a display of information here. Again, if I don't know what the shadow file is, I don't know what I'm looking at. But what this information is, it's got all of the users on the system. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's users. It could be a process on the system. But I do see the Ubuntu user and a bunch of information here. This actually happens to relate to the password. It's not the password of the Ubuntu user in plain text. It's what's called a hash. We won't go into all of the details of what this shadow file is. We just noticed that including sudo in front of that command, I was able to view the contents of that shadow file. So creating a new user will also require super user rights. If I just tried to use the command user add Tom, I'd get permission denied. So sudo in front of that, sudo user add Tom, I don't get an error. I don't see anything happen, but that user Tom has been added to the system. We can associate a password with Tom using the password command, but I also need super user rights for that. So sudo password Tom, and it's password without the O or the R. So sudo passwd Tom. Oh, excuse me. It's asking for a password here. The cursor is flashing. If we just use the password all lowercase, just so it's easy to log in, and I'm going to mess up on purpose here, just so we see if we do happen to have a password mismatch, you'll get this error if that happens. Just rerun that sudo password Tom, and then type out password all lowercase, retype that, and you'll get this password updated successfully. So it created the user Tom, but when we created the user, we didn't assign a password to it. So using the password command with super user rights, we were able to assign that password to Tom. The reason that's important, if I try to switch over to Tom using the su command, so switch user Tom, it will prompt me for a password. We just created that password as password all lowercase. Recognize that the prompt has changed here. We've got the bash file created in such a way that when we open a terminal, we see Ubuntu because that's the user we're logged in as. We see this IP address, but that's all in, is that Z shell or is that bash? Regardless, when we create a new user on the system, I believe that's just shell that it's defaulted to, which is why we just see $. But we can run the command who am I to verify that we are logged in as Tom instead of being logged in as Ubuntu. So think about what we had to do to view the contents of that shadow file as Ubuntu. We couldn't just cat root etc shadow. We needed super user rights to do that. So we included sudo in front of that cat root etc shadow. So sudo cat root etc shadow. It's asking for a password. This is encouraging. Remember that password is password. But we get this message, not necessarily an error, just a message. Tom is not in the sudoers file. This incident will be reported. Uh-oh. It's not actually reported somewhere. Well, I mean, probably on the system, there might be a log that mentions something, but it's not like this goes to IT or anything. That's just a response here. Because Tom was not part of the sudoers file when we created that user, we are unable to view the contents of this file. So let's return to the Ubuntu user, and we can do that by typing exit. So exit, and notice we get back to this prompt Ubuntu at and your IP address. So let's try adding Tom to this sudoers file. So sudo, and then it's vi sudo. So sudo vi sudo. I'm really zoomed in, so this is not as friendly to look at, but we want to scroll to the bottom of this file. Notice here, we've got this Ubuntu all equals in parentheses all, no password, a colon all. We want to do the same thing with Tom. So instead of Ubuntu, it's Tom, and then everything else follows the same. So all equals all in parentheses, a space, no password, where password does not have the O or the R, a colon, and then all. So we're adding Tom to this sudoers group. To save the changes here and to exit out of this file, the caret here is actually the control button. So we want to hit Control X. So Control X. It's asking if we want to save the changes to this file. So Y for yes. And here it's just asking if we want to keep the same name of the file or if we want to rename it. We'll just hit enter. We don't want to change the name of the file at all. So we've added Tom to that sudoers group. So let's switch back to Tom, that user Tom. So su Tom, switch user Tom. Enter our password again, which was just password. And let's see how it behaves if we try to view the contents of that shadow file now using the sudo command. So sudo cat root etc shadow. And it does display the contents of the shadow file. And also notice it has information for that user Tom because he has been added to the system. We know the password is shadow because we set it as shadow. However, it's all in a hash. I'm willing to bet we have different information here. We should all have the same information for Ubuntu, but we probably have different information here because the salt is probably different for each of us, which means the hash is different. Again, not to go into too much detail here, but the important thing is the fact that we were able to view the contents of this file because Tom has been added to the sudoers group.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So when we are accessing this shadow file, are we and you might have just said that, but my brain went somewhere else. Are we all looking at the same file? Meaning if I had students, could a student add, like, could I add somebody else into this file to give them access and then they could play around if they were given access or not? Or is it each session kind of like I'm looking at my own shadow file on my machine and you're looking at yours on your machine,
We're looking at our own shadow files on our own machines,
even though we are in the same classroom?
even though we're in the same classroom. Now that we're all networked together, so each of these machines are able to communicate with each other because
Okay.
of the way it's networked, but they're not the same machines.
Okay.
So they start as identical copies of whichever VM we're launching. But then once we start doing anything, it's going to become unique to our session. So
Okay.
it's just like you're in a computer lab. Everyone's got identical copies of the computer that they're working on, but they're all individual computers as part of that network.
Are we able to have them communicate via in this class, like in the Linux class, where they could talk to each other within the virtual machines, or is that not at this point?
Actually, yes. The next lab that we'll work through will show how to connect those machines to each other with SSH. SSH is actually blocked outside of the classroom, so machines can't communicate in and out that way. But within the classroom, you can use SSH to have the machines communicate to each other. Or what's the other lab, Brandon, where they actually open a communication channel because SSH just connects to the machine?
There's linking and copying files between systems, and then remote networking tools. Both of those use that
Okay.
to change those SSH connections. And then there's a short SSH lab in intro to cybersecurity, but you don't do too much with it. You just kind of establish the connection. And then I believe it's copying and linking files. We also do a file transfer with FTP or NC. We show the difference between like a secure file transfer and then a non-secure file transfer.
Great. Perfect. Yeah, that would, I think when you get them interacting with each other, it just gives them, I don't know, they enjoy it. So thank you.
Yeah. NC will allow you to actually open up like almost like a chat channel between the machines, but then you have to risk students, what kind of messages are they sending back and forth to each other?
Yeah.
So the labs focus mainly on moving files and not opening the quote chat channel.
Yeah, and that's perfect. That's the type of thing I loved for them to do. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we've used that vsudo editor to add Tom to the sudoers group. We can use the vsudo editor to limit privileges as well. So instead of adding them to the sudoers group where they have now access to the same thing that admins would have access to, they can have those privileges changed. So let's exit back to the Ubuntu user. So it was type exit to get back to that Ubuntu at IP address prompt. We can limit a user to a specific command in the sudoers file by kind of adding the path to that command instead of the all at the end. So what I mean is, let's reopen that vsudo. So sudo vsudo. And I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom here. And the very last all out of all of that, I'm going to backspace that out and replace that with root bin root cat. So /bin/cat. So I backspaced out all and I've replaced that with a /bin, a /cat. I'm going to save those changes. So Control X to exit, Y to save, and Enter to just keep the same name of the file itself. Almost like a broken record here, we're going to switch back to Tom one more time. So switch user, so SU Tom. Enter the password. At this point, let's see if we can actually edit the shadow file. So instead of just viewing the contents with the cat command, we can try to open the shadow file using the nano editor. So sudo nano root etc shadow. Asking for a password. If we remember last time we tried this, when we entered the password, it told us we were not allowed to access that file. Well, let's see if we go back and just try to view the contents of the file with the cat command again. So sudo cat root etc shadow. I can still view the contents because when we replace that in the vsudo editor in the sudoers group, we replaced all with the root bin cat. So we're still able to use the concatenate command with sudo, but we couldn't use nano to edit that file. And one step to prove that we can actually edit the file, if we type exit to get back to Ubuntu, sudo nano root etc shadow. I recommend not hitting enter here because we don't want to make any changes to the shadow file itself, but I'm going to hit enter just to show I have access to this file. I could make changes here. So I'm just going to Control X to exit out. Didn't make any changes, didn't save any changes. We can see that in general, added to that sudoers group without any limits on the privileges. I was able to actually open Shadow in the Nano editor, where I'd be able to edit that file. That could be the case, Sergey. So it may be slightly different if we were trying to do that long term.
Yeah, trying to see. I think there was an error somewhere, and I just can't find it. Yes. Yeah. So the way you're set up right now is you're in as a student inside Bartle's classroom, and so I have access to that. So that's how I got into your machine here. What you can do is probably jump into just pick a different machine from that list and see, because with messing with that sudoers file, we may have broken sudo on your machine just now.
It's entirely possible. And yeah, as Brandon was mentioning, in my classroom, I'm a teacher. Brandon's got access to this as well, so he's a teacher. We can click that other machines to see all of the active machines in a classroom. But if you, as one of the student users, click the other machines, you only see your Ubuntu Linux and your Kali Linux. But that's one way that, as the teacher, you can sit up at your desk while they're supposed to be working through a lab, and you can connect to one of these. If someone's user one, I'm sorry if I'm jumping in there. I just connected to the Ubuntu Linux, and I could take a look at what's being worked on or not worked on. That's one of the strengths of the cyber.org range. So that is the to sudo or not to sudo lab. Just recognizing the differences between users that are in the sudoers group and users that aren't in the sudoers group, how they can interact with the file system itself, and then how to add users to the sudoers group. And we use the user add command. I believe that add user command with different options, you can by default set some of the things they're like, maybe even the password immediately without having to run the password command. You might be able to get them into the sudoers group. Don't quote me on that, but there's a user add command, which can just create the user. There's an add user command that you can use with different options to have different settings upon the creation of the user. Now, the second lab here, the Remote Networking Tools Lab, that uses both the Ubuntu Linux machine and the Kali Linux machine. You've got to be really careful here because they're both Linux machines. It's going to be very easy to mistakenly use the wrong IP address when we're trying to connect between the two. So just be very cautious as we do this. We'll be using the secure shell protocol, that's that SSH, to create a secure encrypted connection between the two machines so they can exchange information. To be able to do that, we first need to edit the sshd.config file to allow for access, because otherwise, if we try to connect right away with SSH, there would be something that stops us a little bit. But once we edit that, we're able to connect the Kali and Ubuntu machines via SSH. With the SSH connection, we'll be able to create a file on each machine. And then we could use secure copy protocol to move the file, and then SFTP, so SSH file transfer protocol to move a file. If we're all at the same point where we're in a terminal, we see Ubuntu at and our IP address, we're in a good point. If you're somewhere else, you can either exit out or you can even just close the terminal entirely and open a new terminal. You just want to make sure that you're at this kind of landing page when you open up a fresh terminal. You see the Ubuntu at your IP address. Some of this will look familiar, sudo and nano. But the file that we're editing is that sshd.config file. So it's root etc ssh and then sshd_config. So sudo nano, and then it's a / etc, a / ssh, a / sshd_config. Again, I'm zoomed way in here, so it doesn't look as nice as it may look on your screen. What we're looking for is a line that says password authentication no. And we want to change that to yes. So there it is. So I'm deleting out the no, replacing that with yes. And then since I'm in Nano, just Control X, Y to save, enter, and I don't change the name of the file itself. We do need to restart the SSH service for that to actually take effect. And that command is sudo service SSH restart. The command's kind of backwards in terms of how we think about it. We're restarting the SSH service. And we have to do the same thing on the Kali Linux machine. So we made these changes on the Ubuntu machine. We'll switch over to our Kali Linux machine. Instead of having the file icons to the left, the file icons to the top here, it's still that same black rectangle with a white border. Zoom in again. And I'm repeating that process of sudo nano root etc ssh sshd_config. Scrolling down to the password authentication line, replacing no with yes. Control X, yes to, or Y to save, enter to keep the name of the file, and then restarting that SSH service. So sudo service SSH restart. So now that we've made these changes, still on the Kali machine, we're going to start an SSH tunnel between the two. To do that, we use the SSH command. We need the username that we're going to be logging in as, and that user on the Ubuntu machine is Ubuntu @ and then we need the Ubuntu Linux IP address. You have a few different ways that you can get that. Depending on how many tabs you have open, you can get the IP address of the Ubuntu Linux machine from the tab itself. So I can see I've got 113.5, so 10.15.113.5. You want to make sure you're using your Ubuntu Linux machine. Another way you could get that, if you click the Other Machines button, again, you only see the 2 machines for your student user, but with the Ubuntu Linux, you could see your IP address. So for user 001, their Ubuntu Linux IP address is at 10.15.4.203. And there are still more ways you could get it. You could go back to the Ubuntu Linux machine, look at the terminal. You'd see the IP address from that prompt. You could run the hostname -I command. We just need one of those ways to get the IP address of the Ubuntu Linux machine. And then we're going to specify port 22. So we're using the option or the flag 22. Option or flag P and then 22. So SSH Ubuntu @ 10.15, and then whichever the last 2 numerals are for your Ubuntu Linux machine, -P, and then 22. The first time that we try to access that machine, we'll get this pop-up, and it asks us if we want to continue connecting. We'll type yes. It is asking for the password. The Ubuntu machine has a very secure password of password, all lowercase. And what we notice is we connected. It almost looks like we're in the Ubuntu Linux machine because the prompt in the terminal has switched from Kali at the IP address to Ubuntu at the Ubuntu Linux IP address. We could do a PWD to see where we are on the file system, and we're in root home Ubuntu. So we do have to be a little careful recognizing where we are. We're using the Kali Linux machine, but we are connected to the Ubuntu Linux machine. It's a little easier to recognize if it's like completely unique operating systems like Linux and Windows, but it's a lot easier to get that SSH connection working between the two Linux machines this way. We could do an ls to see all the files that are within root home Ubuntu. And just from that, we are connected. Now, this isn't a malicious connection like we've opened a backdoor that we learned about in the cybersecurity course, right? We would have had the IP address because it would have been shared to us, shared with us, and we were given the password for that user. We knew that the password was password. So this isn't something that's done maliciously. This is something where the information exchange is known between users, or maybe they're like they are with us, they're our own machines, so we already know what everything is. I'm at home, I want to connect to my work laptop. I don't know why I do it through SSH, but I could do it through SSH if it wasn't blocked from admin. Could maybe RDP. There are different ways I could connect to it if for whatever reason I needed access to the work computer at home. While I'm in the Ubuntu machine from the Kali Linux machine, I can create a text file with the touch command. So touch ubuntu_home.txt. Touch ubuntu_home.txt. And then using the nano editor, I didn't type that ubuntu_home.txt very quickly. I just used tab to autocomplete that for me. So I had nano, I typed a U, and then a tab. It autocompletes that for me. It opens this text file in the nano editor. And I mean, I can type whatever I wanted, but just so it's easy to follow, we'll type this file was created in the Ubuntu from Kali. This file was created in the Ubuntu from Kali. We'll close out of that and save those changes. So Control X, Y, Enter. If we use the ls command one more time, notice we now have this ubuntu_home.txt file. The color codedness lets me know file types. So I see all those blues, those are directories on the system. The white lets me know that that's a type of readable file, like a text file. We could do a cat on that text file just to verify that the information was saved. So this file was created in the Ubuntu from Kali. And to close out of that SSH connection, it's just exit. Notice it says logout connection to that IP address was closed, and we're back to seeing that Kali at IP address prompt. If we go over to the Ubuntu machine, we could repeat that whole process. I could do a quick ls on the Ubuntu machine. And notice I do see that ubuntu_home.txt file. a quick cat to verify it's got the same information there. This file was created in the Ubuntu from Kali. So we can see we can connect to machines within the network, and we could have used this if Brandon was user 007. I could have connected to his machines and sent a file. It's kind of a roundabout way to communicate. He'd have to know I sent the file to then view the contents of that text file, but that's a way that machines are able to talk back and forth. So again, we could do all of this in reverse from the Ubuntu machine. I am going to make one connection to the Kali Linux, so SSH Kali at, and then the Kali IP address. Again, I just got that looking at the tab itself. You could go back to the Kali Linux machine, get that from the prompt in the terminal. You could get that from the other machines. So SSH Kali at your Kali IP address and specifying port 22 again. And then just yes. And then enter the password, which for Kali is also the cyber secure password. It does log in a little bit differently. Well, the login looks a little different here, but we are connected to that Kali machine. PWD, we see where we are in the file system. Everything looks good. Do you remember off the top of your head, Brandon, the command to switch shells? See if I can find that real fast. See if I can kind of force that to look the same with the prompt. Switch shell.
Mm, yeah, no, I can't remember it off the top of my head.
Let me see. This is not in the lab. I'm just curious if I can get this to say Kali at and the IP address. Because if I run just shell, no. B shell, that doesn't do what I want that to do. Change shell, that's right. And you might need super user rights for this. Change shell -s bin bash password. Probably not. I probably need super user rights. Let's see. No, not changing that the way I wanted to. I was hoping maybe I could get this to change the prompt to look similar with the Kali and the IP address. It's not that that's really going to affect anything. I just wanted to see if I could change the visual aspect of it. Let's see. Let's real quick, since we are logged in here, let's create a file. We're not even going to add any contents to it. We're just going to create the file itself. So this touch Kali _ home.txt. And then exit to close out of that SSH connection. So let's review what we've done. From Kali, we connected to Ubuntu. We made that Ubuntu _ home.txt file. From Ubuntu, we connected to Kali, and we made that Kali _ home.txt file. So connect those machines, and then from the other machines, we've added little files here. So we can view and transfer with SCP. So now that we have terminated the SSH connection, let's see. Yeah, we already did that ls. Yep, we already did the ls. I see a Brandon.txt file now. Thank you, Brandon.
I was gonna say, yeah, it just says hi everyone, so you can actually show it. So what I did while Bartles was doing that, just to show you can SSH at the same time and actually do some things too.
So let's try transferring a file using SCP. So SCP, we've got the Ubuntu file here. So Ubuntu _ home.txt. We're going to try to send this to the Kali machine. So Kali at, and then your Kali IP address. Remember, we're still in the Ubuntu machine. but we're trying to use SCP to transfer this Ubuntu _ home.txt file to the Kali, and we need to specify where on the file system. So it's a colon, and then it's root home Kali. So colon / home / Kali. It's prompting for the password. And again, password is just password. We don't know if that has successfully transferred that over. It looks like it has because of that 100% there. We can verify that by switching over to the Kali Linux machine. Using ls, we can see the Ubuntu _ home.txt file. We can view the contents of that file, right, with the cat command. This file was created in the Ubuntu from Kali. We just transferred it back over. Since we're on the Kali machine, we can view and transfer with SFTP. So to open up a connection there, it's SFTP Ubuntu @ and then your Ubuntu IP address. It's all looking pretty similar. We're just recognizing that we're using different protocols to connect to the other Linux machine. So SFTP Ubuntu @ the Ubuntu IP address from the Kali machine. Enter the password. And notice we are connected. Our prompt says that SFTP. At this point, we could type help to get a list of different commands we can try to do while we're here. If we want to try to transfer a file from the Kali system to the Ubuntu, that command is actually the put command. We can see that put uploads a file. So we can put Kali _ home.txt and then specify the full path to where we want it on the Ubuntu system, which is root home Ubuntu. So we're putting this Kali _ home.txt file, which is currently on the Kali system, to the Ubuntu system. Again, that's another very fast one. It's because these files are next to nothing in size that we see that 100% so quickly. And we didn't add any content to that file itself. We just created an empty text file. We can exit out of this connection. We can go back to the Ubuntu Linux machine. And remember the last time I ran that ls, I had the brandon.txt, I had the Ubuntu _ home.txt files. Now with an ls, I also see the Kali _ home.txt file. So we saw 3 different ways to connect back and forth between those machines. So we were able to transfer files between systems. Not a direct form of communication, but we could be exchanging messages that way and then open up the messages. So, do we have any questions regarding the 2 labs we just ran through, the to sudo or not to sudo, or the remote network tools? Because if not, let's see, we've got that. We can always find updated information regarding workshops, boot camps, and events at our website, cyber.org/events. we currently don't have any boot camps created yet, but we're planning on getting some more workshops out in the fall. What was our deadline for that in terms of the planning? It was the 12th. Yeah, the 12th of this month, we should have everything planned on our end in terms of which workshops we will be hosting throughout the fall semester. And with that,